Straight to a Fox News alert, one of New Zealand's darkest days. 49 people dead after gunfire erupts inside two mosques in New Zealand.
Police are charging one man with murder overnight as the Prime Minister calls this a well-coordinated terror attack.
All right, we've been watching this all night, or all morning long for there, and it's in the afternoon. Let's get right to Kitty Logan, who's live in London with the breaking developments. Kitty.
Good morning, guys. Yes, New Zealand police confirming that 49 people were killed in this shooting, and it appears the gunman deliberately attacked two mosques when they were full of people during Friday prayers. Now, the shooting started at around 1:45 p.m. local time at those two mosques in the centre of the city of Christchurch. That is on the South Island of New Zealand. The violent attack went on for around 5 minutes. 41 people died at just one of those mosques. Witnesses describe a heavily armed man dressed in black military-style clothing. Police also found two explosive devices fixed to a car and other weapons. Now, the Prime Minister of New Zealand has condemned these shootings as a terrorist attack.
This is one of New Zealand's darkest days. Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence.
Now, New Zealand police detained 4 suspects right after those shootings. One man has already been charged with murder. He has not been named, but an Australian man is being linked to the attack after claiming responsibility online. This man also wrote a lengthy anti-immigration manifesto and apparently posted a violent video of the attack online. That was later removed, but it is still circulating on social media. And at least 20 people were injured in this shooting too. They were rushed to hospitals for emergency treatment. Police cordoned off the areas around the mosque. They're urging people to stay indoors for now, but authorities are emphasising that they do believe this is a one-off incident. They're not expecting any more attacks, but New Zealand certainly ramping up the security, and this is a country very much in shock. They're not used to this level of violence at all. Back to you guys.
That's right.
Thank you, Kitty.
Kitty.
I was talking to a friend last night. She lives in New Zealand, went to college with me, and she was texting me saying, we have just had a massive terror attack, and this is before America even knew about it. She said, I was in the carpool line waiting to get my little girl from school. They rushed all the parents into the office.
Right.
The little girl was in lockdown, so she couldn't get to her daughter, but she was so thankful she was at the school with all the parents knowing that they were safe.
Yeah.
Her husband was on lockdown. She said, we've never experienced anything like this. You can actually walk into their schools. The school doors aren't even locked.
Yeah, I mean, it's a place where they have very, very strict gun laws, and you wouldn't expect anything like this to happen. But the terms of the term immigration, and the fact is, the demeanor of the shooter, it makes you think either he played a ton of video games or he's killed before, because he was laughing, calm, cool, and collected as he was executing people who were unarmed.
Well, he obviously wants notoriety because he live streamed it, as Kitty just said. The video's been taken down from Facebook. It was 17 minutes in length. Because he wants notoriety, we're not going to show his face, and we are not going to use his name. But on the video, you can see him driving through Christchurch in New Zealand, and he's just before he stops at the first mosque, he says, let's get this party started. He enters and fires, and then another part of the video shows bodies piled up inside. Then he gets into a beige Subaru station wagon and drives away. And he says, and you can hear his voice, he says, there wasn't even enough time to aim. There were so many targets, because inside that mosque at the time were hundreds of people.
He is so hateful, and if you read this manifesto, he started planning it 2 years ago after the terror attack in Stockholm on April 7th, 2017. He said that set him off. He wanted to avenge the deaths of his people. He doesn't like how America is a melting pot of individuals. He thinks that people need to stay in their homelands. And he says he doesn't hate Muslims if they're in their homelands and if they practice their traditions in their own nations.
Yeah. Jim Hansen was on Fox and Friends first, former Army Special Forces operator, and he's seen some of this horror up close and personal.
It's hard to even imagine the mentality that decides I want to not just slaughter a bunch of people because of my obscene beliefs, but I want to broadcast that to the world in the hopes of creating a race war. which was his avowed goal. And I think it's horrific. I think this is something that, unfortunately, that we're going to see the damage that he's done to relations around the world. And I hope we can minimize that and not give him, the advantage of having accomplished what his heinous goal was.
Right. And once again, we're not going to give you his name. We're not going to show his image because that's what he wants notoriety. We do know that apparently he is a man in his 20s. He's from Australia. He has been charged with murder, the only one charged with murder. So far, 4 people in all have been arrested. None of the 4 were on any sort of terror watch list.
Meanwhile, yesterday, domestically, the President of the United States is going to be forced to use his veto for the first time as 12 Republicans voted against his emergency order at the border to try to repurpose money in order to give us some type of border security. Remember, the Washington Post, New York Times admit in different ways, in different columns with different reporters, there's a crisis at the border, humanitarian as well as just percentage-wise, the amount of people coming across, whether it's drugs or MS-13, are bad actors. And the numbers are through the roof in terms of what our Border Patrol has been forced to deal with. But it didn't stop 12 Republicans for deciding the president was out of bounds.
Well, the White House was trying to keep the GOP united. That didn't happen. Mitt Romney said it's not about border security. He says, I'm for a barrier. This is about the Constitution and the balance of power. The president immediately tweeted at 3:16 p.m. once that vote came down, he wrote veto with an exclamation point. He also tweeted this.
He did. He wrote, I look forward to vetoing the just passed Democratic-inspired resolution, which would open borders while increasing crime, drugs, and trafficking in our country. I thank all of the strong Republicans who voted to support border security and our desperately needed wall. The Republicans who voted against the president said, look, we're doing this because of the Constitution, and it says Congress is going to control the purse. And you can't just take money and go willy-nilly spend it. Those are the 12 Republicans who voted with the Democrats. And look, it's a tough call because when the leader of your party is for one thing, and it is such a primary thing for this president, for them to say, yeah, we're really strong about border security, but the Constitution is the reason we're going to vote against the leader of our party. Listen, they're going to have some explaining
and
to do.
And if you're a voter, you want to know if this person represents you, if those 12 Republicans are from your state. It's Senator Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Lamar Alexander, Mitt Romney, Jerry Moran, Pat Toomey, Rob Portman, Roger Wicker, Marco Rubio, and Roy Blunt.
Meanwhile, Tom Homan weighed in on what those 12 just did.
These 12 senators, they should wear a Border Patrol uniform for one shift and come back and tell us there's not a national emergency. A lot of these Republicans say, well, we don't want to back it up because we're afraid the Democratic president in the future would do it. They've already done it. That's where DACA came from. President Obama went around Congress, gave amnesty to 800,000 people. So it's, so they got to stop playing nice and support this president.
Two that were most vulnerable in this election, they say, this upcoming election, they were concerned about their vote was Tillis and Gardner, Colorado and North Carolina, respectively. And they both voted with the president on this. Meanwhile, don't go crazy, because look back in history. Ronald Reagan vetoed 78 times. This will be the president's first. H.W. Bush, 41. He had 44. Clinton, 37. 43. Bush, 43 at 12. Barack Obama had 12 as well. For President Trump, who's kept his powder dry. People waiting for him to erupt. Every network saying, look out, the president's going to have redemption and revenge. Not a word. He's like, listen, I picked up the phone, I called, you guys came over, Ben Sass came over, Lindsey Graham interrupted my dinner, you had an idea, I didn't love the idea, so therefore, I'm just going to veto this thing.
There's an article about this, and it says the superlative goes to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who vetoed the most of any president, 635 bills while in office.
Right, and when we saw that graphic, Ronald Reagan had the 78 vetoes, but he was overridden 9 times. George Herbert Walker Bush, 44 vetoes, only overridden once. Barack Obama, 12 vetoes, overridden once. The big question is, would there be enough votes in the Senate to override the president?
No, you need a 2/3 majority.
No, probably not. And so, nonetheless, the House of Representatives is going to take it up again on March 26th. They got a week off. They've been working so hard. They need another week vacation so that when they come back on March 26th, they're going to go ahead and take another bite of the apple.
Meanwhile, Beto O'Rourke decided he wanted to run for president, and he made a series of speeches, and he let everybody know his priorities. Number one, if this is true, the world's going to end in about 10 years, we have to do what we did at Normandy. Watch.
those who were on the beaches in Normandy, those who faced an existential threat to Western democracy and our way of life, they showed us the way. We can all come together, we can unite, we can marshal the resources, and we can convene the countries of the world around otherwise unsolvable problems. That moment is now for us on this issue. So if there's a time to reassert global leadership and make friends instead of enemies, it's today, because the challenges are too great to do otherwise.
So essentially, it's last call. We got to do something to save the planet. I think it was yesterday, Nancy Pelosi was asked about his greatest achievement in Congress, and she could not name any single particular thing. Said he brought a lot of vitality. He served on different committees.
Well, vitality's good.
Yeah, vitality's great, but did not name a particular achievement.
Well, he made the announcement yesterday morning, and he hit the campaign trail, made several stops in Iowa. Support for the new Green Deal, said man's final chance to take action on climate change crisis. He talked about food grown in this country will no longer prosper in these types of soils, and predicts a massive migration of tens or hundreds of millions of people from places that are going to be uninhabitable or under the sea.
I guess he doesn't know that we solved the crisis in New York with Meatless Mondays. But having said that, I asked Secretary of State Mike Pompeo yesterday, when it comes to climate change, not knowing about the Normandy, because I had to leave my all electronics outside at the State Department, not knowing about the Normandy statement to compare it to, but I asked him, when it comes to climate change, how big a deal? Everyone's talking about global warming and the threat to this country. When you look at the top 5 threats to this nation, where do you rank global warming or climate change?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it in the top 5.
Why?
Because I can count to 5 that get you to things that present more risk to the people I used to represent in Kansas and citizens all across America, whether it's the threat that we've talked about today from China, the nuclear proliferation risk that extends from Pakistan through all those folks who have these weapon systems, places like North Korea where they can sell these weapons. I think I'm at 5 already, but I could give you a whole list of threats that I think we can affect change on in a way that will really make a difference for the security of the American people.
It just goes to show you how different this country is going to be if a Democrat wins. Because he's not,
it's a binary choice. It's very clear what the Democrats stand for and what the Republicans stand for. It's interesting. Slate's Josh Voorhees writes regarding Beto O'Rourke, of all the major candidates, he brings the least to the Democratic Party. We're going to compare how Beto compares to Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren,
Joe Biden, if he gets in the race.
Within a half an hour.
We talk about Venezuela, China, and as well as
North Korea.
Coming up throughout the next 3 hours.
And Israel.
Yes, and they would do a rocket attack right before we went in for the interview.
All right, we'll see the rest of that interview coming up. Good job, Brian. All right, 12 minutes after the top of the hour. This video is stunning. A smuggler using 2 little girls as decoys to get across the border. Mark Morgan says this is proof that kids are being used as pawns in the border crisis, and he joins us next.
Plus, Nancy Pelosi wants to lower the voting age to 16 so high schoolers can vote. Is that a good idea or just a move to get more young voters?
Good idea for the Dems,
I think it'd be great. Right. What about 12? What about 10?
A smuggler caught on camera using 2 little girls, ages 6 and 9, as decoys, dropping them over the San Diego border to distract the border agents.
So is this a once-in-a-million operation? Meanwhile, 10 people illegally crossed into the U.S. once agents left their post to help the girls. Is this further proof of the escalating crisis at the border? Joining us right now, former Border Patrol chief under President Obama, Mark Morgan. Mark, have you seen anything like this before?
Absolutely, Brian. And this should not be surprising to anybody. The experts working the border have been sounding the alarm for a long, long time that kids are being exploited every single day because Congress has failed to do its job to protect this border. Think about it. All you have to do is grab a kid, enter as a family unit, and you're into the United States. But if you're a convicted felon, you think that may not work. All you got to do is grab a 6-year-old girl, treat her like a piece of trash, and dump her over the fence, and then you sneak around. And if people think that every one of those 10 that snuck around is a good, decent person, they're living in a fantasy world.
We had Tom Homan on, and he was saying that by the Senate rejecting the president's plan, he said that's ridiculous. There's definitely a crisis down there. It is definitely an emergency. What are your thoughts?
Tom Homan is absolutely right, and he's a guy that's got a heck of a lot more experience on the border than I do. He's 100% right. What this happened, they know. The politicians know this is a crisis, and what we're talking about today is another example. So this was purely about politics, identity politics, political ideology. They know there's an issue at the border. They're failing to do their job. So if I had 2 seconds with the president, I'd look him in the eye and say, thank you. Thank you for doing what other people have not done and failed to do to protect our border. I absolutely hope he vetoes this.
Mark, you said before in 15 minutes I could work this to change our policy and it would immediately have effect on the border, barrier or not. What are they?
First of all, we have to, Brian, that's the big issue. We have to stop the incentive from these people coming here. So one thing you could do is what they're doing right now in the San Diego sector as a pilot is those individuals come and seek an asylum, they're making them wait in Mexico for their asylum hearing to come up, which we know the overwhelming majority of those are false claims and they're denied. That's one thing that we could do tomorrow across the entire southwest border. We remove the incentive, they'll stop coming.
Mark, I know you know Robert Mueller. I know you know all the key players in the Mueller report. Are we going to see that report drop today?
You know, the information that I'm hearing is mixed. We keep talking about that all the time. It's going to come the next day. Here's what I'll say. I worked for Director Mueller for 12 years. When he's ready and the report is complete, that's when we'll see it. He's not going to be impacted by any outside pressure whatsoever.
We saw Peter Strzok's testimony. We saw Lisa Page's testimony. You know these people. What struck you, pun intended, about what we know about Peter Strzok and his insurance policy?
Well, I tell you, it went, as someone who spent 20 years in the FBI, I was disgusted. And it really goes to the heart of everything that you should not be as a federal agent. They represented everything that is the antithesis of what FBI agents are. And I hope the American people know that these bad decisions that were made were done by just a couple of people at the highest level. It was not done by the majority of the FBI. The FBI still believes in the American people and doing the right thing.
The justice said, don't touch the Clinton Foundation, don't touch Hillary. But he said that even though his biases was clear, he had nothing against President Trump. I just find that hard to believe. Mark, we'll have you back. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. The left is cheering California Governor Gavin Newsom for stopping the death penalty in his state, but they still support late-term abortions. Diamond and Silk are here to call out the hypocrisy. Next.
Plus, I had a chance to go one-on-one with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, on all the hot issues around the world. You'll see it shortly.
Good morning. Back with your headlines and a Fox News alert. The Israeli military believes a rocket attack on Tel Aviv may have been a mistake, according to Israeli media reports. The rockets may have been fired during routine maintenance overnight. Israel retaliating with 100 airstrikes on terror sites in Gaza. The Israelis targeting several Hamas sites, including its headquarters and where they store weapons. An all-out mafia war could be brewing in New York City after mob boss Frankie Cali is gunned down outside his home. Reports this morning say authorities are eyeing John Gotti's brother, Gene. Gene Gotti, another member of the Gambino crime family, is 6 months out of prison and may be looking to get back into the family business. Police believe Cali was lured outside his Staten Island home by a staged car crash. The Senate blocking a measure to allow special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe to go public. That vote coming hours after the House unanimously approved the resolution. Senator Lindsey Graham strongly opposed the measure. He wants it to include a provision for a new investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails. Graham says that needs to happen before Mueller's report is made public. Ainsley.
All right, thank you. Some on the far left cheering on California Governor Gavin Newsom's signing off on the executive order to end the death penalty in California, calling it immoral.
Yet many of those applauding the move still support third trimester abortions, showing no mercy for what many people say are innocent babies.
Here to react, Fox Nation host Diamond and Silk joining us from Diamond and Silk World Headquarters. Ladies, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning.
So what do you make of California Governor Gavin Newsom signing this executive order that essentially puts on hold the 737 inmates who are on death row? They will not be executed by the state as long as he is the governor.
Well, it just shows that they will protect criminals at all costs and forget about the law-abiding citizens. They forget about people that is doing the right things here. You know, I think it's sad because, you know, it re-victimized the victims and their families.
Yes, it does.
You know, like you said, they want to take and they want to kill babies. They want to murder babies. But then they have a problem with executing people that have committed heinous murders and done stupid things in our country. I think it's so sad. I think it's so sick. And going against the will of the people to exert your will is not governing, it's dictatorship, and the people of California should hold him accountable.
Well, if you read some of the articles out there and listen to some of the sound bites, you had Laci Peterson's family speaking out against this. You had another man whose 12-year-old little girl was taken from a slumber party, kidnapped, raped, murdered. He said he died a little bit when he heard Gavin Newsom say this. He said that this is the punishment that man deserves. And he says it's important to close that chapter in his daughter's life. He said he's more concerned about his daughter's killer than his daughter. And then Laci Peterson's family says Laci doesn't have a life. And in the long run, we're paying for him, her murderer, to stay, her ex-husband, to stay on death row. But Gavin Newsom said, I can't kill hundreds and hundreds of people when I know some of them are innocent. Do you agree with that? Do you believe some of them are innocent?
Well, wait a minute. If you on death row, you are on death row for a reason. That's the thing. And you can't kill hundreds of innocent people, but they can kill hundreds of innocent babies. Think about that for a minute. The hypocrisy on the left is so real. It's ignorant to me of his mindset. And then the victims, how they're being re-victimized again. And then you got these people sitting in jail for the rest of their lives. Taxpayers' money have to pay for that. I want to know how much money is Newsom getting. Is he getting a kickback, patty whack from these prisons?
Well, all I know, if we want to get more of those opinions, Diamond and Silk can be heard regularly with the double click on the Fox News app on Fox Nation, right?
Yes, FoxNation.com.
All right, FoxNation.com, or just download the app. Thanks, ladies.
Thanks, ladies. Have a good weekend.
All right. Meanwhile, breaking news. Our lead story on this Friday morning, nearly 50 people dead after a terror attack in New Zealand. What we're learning about the suspects coming up next.
Plus, a one-on-one with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We give you some behind-the-scenes look, as well as talk about the hot spots in the world.
We are back with a Fox News alert. New Zealand now on high alert. At least 49 gunned down in what's being called a terrorist attack on 2 mosques. Many of the victims are believed to be migrants or refugees in New Zealand. 4 people now in custody.
All right, police say 1 Australian man is charged with the murder and will appear in court tomorrow morning. Yep, he's alive. He's said to have an anti-Muslim and anti-immigration agenda.
Video of the attack was live streamed on Facebook, but authorities there are urging people not to share it. It has been taken down, but it is circulating. Prime Minister is condemning the shootings. They are referring to this as New Zealand's darkest day. And while this person clearly wanted attention by live streaming it, we're not going to show his name. We're not going to use his name. We're not going to show his face. But you know, there were hints out there because on his Twitter feed, apparently there were images of ammunition magazines with names scrawled across them in white marker, including the names of 2 mass shooters who targeted migrants and Muslims.
He was there in New Zealand training, according to his manifesto that he wrote. And he wasn't planning on doing this in Christchurch, but he said he started visiting some of the mosques and looking at websites and determined that these individuals, basically, according to this manifesto, he's a sick man, he's saying that they deserved it because he was avenging the deaths of his people from other terrorist attacks.
Yeah, one of the witnesses and a survivor said this. He just came in, he started shooting. I just lied down there on the bench thinking that if I get out, I'll get shot. So if I get up, I'll get shot. Oh, so I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed so I can be alive. I was the last guy to come out of the mosque after the shooting stopped, and in the doors there were a lot of bodies.
Wow.
So again, first we heard 20, then we heard 40, and then it topped out at 49 with 20 severely injured. I did not know this when I had a chance to go to the State Department yesterday and talk to the Secretary of State, but there were 3 separate stories even developing when I got on Amtrak until when I got in the doors. Just imagine what it's like to be Secretary of State. So here is a few minutes, or about 5-6 minutes, of our 20-minute sit-down with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, great to see you.
Brian, it's great to be with you.
The first time since 2014, if my stats are correct, the rockets came out of Gaza into Israel.
The Israelis have the right to defend themselves. I'm confident that they will be able to do that. I regret that the folks in the Gaza Strip, probably Hamas, although I suppose we shouldn't speculate, fire these rockets and put Israelis at risk. Right. This only presents an increased risk of escalation, something that we hope doesn't happen, but you should know we will support the Israelis' right to defend themselves.
Do you worry how much the anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic language coming out, mostly the Democratic side in Congress, hurts long-term the Israeli-American relations?
I do. I worried about it for multiple reasons, not just the relationship between these two democracies, but I worry about it because it undermines what we began today, Brian, the protection of the dignity and rights and the religious freedom of every human being. And so when I hear anti-Semitic remarks, it saddens me, and I know it undermines what is the greatest about the United States of America.
Seeing you and the president walk away in Hanoi, you do a great job keeping a poker face. But as the president spoke and talked about the deal you weren't going to have, do you feel personally that you let him down?
I don't. I think we made real progress, even in Hanoi, even a place where we didn't reach the final resolution of what we've been asking for all along. We didn't get an agreement for the full and final denuclearization in a verified way. This is a long process. The president's always said if we can keep missiles from flying and keep nuclear tests from happening, that's a good first start. We know what the final objective is.
It looks like the president and President Xi, if they are to meet at Mar-a-Lago, it's not going to happen until at the earliest mid-April. What's going on here?
So real progress has been made. I think that's absolutely true. I think both leaders want to make sure that we've had enough progress so that the two seniors, President Xi and President Trump, can get together and close out any of the remaining items. Whether it's the beginning of April, the middle of April, or if it even takes a couple of weeks longer, we ought to get this right. And I'm very hopeful that the two leaders can come together to get a trade deal that will benefit not only America, but the rest of the world as well.
So your message to the Venezuelan people, how much more garbage do they have to eat before America gets more directly involved?
Boy, when I think about how bad it is today and what I know it's going to be like tomorrow and the day after that, it's going to get worse. The Maduro regime is truly evil, denying food to the hungry, denying medicine to the sick. We've delivered. The American people have been so generous, 200 metric tons of food on their borders they won't let in. We are continuing to take efforts.
Have we put troops into Colombia ready to act should they need to act?
It's a fine question, and I'll let the Department of Defense talk about their movements of their
So you're passing on
soldiers.
the question?
I am, yes.
I understand you're making a trip to the Middle East. Iraq and Iran meeting, forging relationships. Iraq's ignoring the sanctions, and Grand Ayatollah Sistani sat down with the president of Iran. It seems like in terms of soft power and diplomatic power, we're getting our butts kicked over there. What's happening?
Yeah, I don't see it that way. America has been a strong supporter of Iraq. We still are working to take down ISIS in their country. I had a conversation with our prime minister just a couple days back. I think we're making progress on developing a strong, independent, sovereign Iraq, but there's no doubt Iran has its eyes set on taking control of that country. I don't think that's good for the Iraqi people. I know it's not good for the United States of America, and we're going to continue to do the CT fight there and stand up an Iraqi government that's free and less involved with what's going on in Iraq.
Is it true that members of the Taliban 5, that what the previous administration let out of Gitmo, they are part of these peace talks right now, the ones that we exchanged for Bo Bergdahl, many of which described the worst of the worst? Is that true?
Brian, I don't want to answer who's been showing up there. I will say this.
Is that acceptable if they are?
I'll say this. We've negotiated with some really bad people. State Department doesn't often get to choose exactly who it is. We're trying to achieve good security outcomes for the American people. Sometimes we end up talking to some really bad folks.
And they would be okay to stay in that room as far as you're concerned?
If we can deliver security for the American people, we'll talk to just about anyone.
Before I came in here, it became clear that Republicans have jumped ship and decided to not vote with a piece of legislation that does not go along with the president's need for emergency money at the border. Do you side with the 59 that voted against the president, or do you side with the 41 that voted with him?
Count me in the 41.
Why?
I've spent a lot of time with my Mexican counterparts. This challenge at our southern border is real. I believe it's a crisis, but call it what you will. The challenge of not knowing who's coming in and out of our country and what drugs or people or illicit materials might be coming across our southern border is real. We need to take serious action against it, and the president's executive order does just that.
Your predecessor famously basically admitted that he called the president a moron. You have a much different relationship with him. What does he not get that you get?
My relationship with the president is one that's an effort on my part to execute his vision for America's foreign policy. He's the commander-in-chief. He provides the direction. I go out every day and work my tail off to try and execute it and implement it for him.
So a story on you today that talked about why is the Secretary of State doing so much traveling in the country from Iowa to Texas to Kansas? Is he running for president? Is he running for Senate?
I suppose everybody gets unhappy when I don't go to Martha's Vineyard like my predecessors did. They traveled domestically too. America's our first client, and I wanted to go out to Iowa to talk about China and trade and why it matters. I went to Texas this week to talk about energy and how American innovation and creativity have created enormous wealth for America. And I'm going back to Kansas next week to talk about entrepreneurship. I'm doing this on behalf of America. I'm very focused on what I'm doing here today.
Are you ruling out running for the Senate in Kansas?
I have. I've told folks I'm not going to do that.
Long term, would I be surprised in 2024 if you're running for president?
I don't know if you'd be, but my wife would be shocked.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You forget, number one in his class at West Point and a Harvard grad, and constitutionally, he thinks the president's on the money with what he's doing, but he's got his hands full.
I like how transparent he is. He seems like he's answering the questions.
He is.
Except the ones that are national security. Exactly. But.
Right.
And I like the fact that he talked about why he went out to Iowa, because the farmers are impacted by the trade imbalance and the trade deals, and he went to explain what the government's doing.
And I will real quick on 5G. It is a major deal. We warned Poland. We warned Germany. Don't do it. Don't take it from the Chinese company. And they seem to be doing it anyway. I'm wondering why our allies are ignoring us.
We're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
All right. Great job. Good job going down to Foggy Bottom.
Yep. Thanks. 20 minutes before the top of the hour. There's Jillian.
That's right. Good morning. We're following a number of stories starting with this, and we are now getting our first look at one of the mangled black boxes from that doomed Ethiopian Airlines jet. Meantime, we're learning the pilot of that Boeing 737 MAX 8 reported serious trouble right after takeoff, with the plane accelerating wildly. The New York Times reporting within 3 minutes of takeoff, the pilot wanted to turn around. We'll keep you updated on that story. A top general warning that Google is indirectly helping the Chinese military.
The work that Google is doing in China is indirectly benefiting the Chinese military. Look, we're the good guys. We watch with great concern when industry partners work in China, knowing that there is that indirect benefit.
Marine General Joseph Dunford making those remarks while testifying at a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. The tech company did not renew a contract with the armed forces on a drone project, but is still allegedly working to develop a search engine for the Chinese government. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi voicing her support on lowering the voting age.
I myself have always been for lowering the voting age to 16. I think it's really important to capture kids when they're in high school, when they're interested in all of this, when they're learning about government, to be able to vote.
Last week, Congress voted down an amendment headed by Democrats. Let's look at your headlines.
Right. And by the way, Mike Pompeo answered that about Google. He's seething. He seems to be seething about Google's deciding to not take our contract, but to go help China's indirectly military, their defense. Unbelievable.
Jillian, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jillian. 42 minutes after the top of the hour, Beto O'Rourke is in the race, but how does he stack up to the rest of the 2020 candidates? We're breaking down his chances next.
Plus, Alex Trebek thanking fans for overwhelming support after his cancer diagnosis. The new message from the Jeopardy host coming up.
I don't think there's ever been a greater moment in our lifetimes and for this country. The challenges have never been greater, more severe, more critical, or more defining for the future.
There you got Beto O'Rourke kicking off his presidential campaign, standing on the counter there in Iowa. He was in Iowa a couple of days more there. He's now one of 12 candidates vying for the Democratic nomination for president. So how does he stack up against the other 2020 hopefuls? Here to break it all down is former campaign pollster for Senator Ted Cruz, Chris Wilson. Chris, good to have you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's take a look at Beto O'Rourke versus some of the others. When you square him against Joe Biden, who he's hiring staff, he's going to get in shortly. Who's the advantage go to?
Well, I think you have to look a little bit at the background. Joe Biden still has that Obama shine around him. And even though if O'Rourke's got any advantages here, it's his youth, but I think Biden's able to overcome that through the organization he's built. And even though that's not the sort of Democratic establishment that you see on Twitter, it's still who makes the difference. And so because of that, I think in a head-to-head, who has the most staying power, if you will, in a primary contest, Biden wins that because of his Obama connections.
Well, you know what? Maybe this would be called the O'Biden ticket if he decides to be the vice president.
That would be a strong one.
All right. As you square Beto against Elizabeth Warren.
You know, the one thing, they both have a bit of an inauthentic aspect to them. O'Rourke sort of tried to run as to climb a Hispanic mantle, even though he's an Irish American running as a Texas congressman.
Right.
But Elizabeth Warren can't get around her cultural misappropriation.
That was it's
a big scandal, and I think what you're going to see is New Hampshire is going to eliminate her from the race altogether because of that, and O'Rourke's able to come through because of authenticity. That's
all right. Next stop, Kamala Harris, who, we should point out, when she declared she was going to run for president, had the biggest crowd in the history of crowds out in Oakland, California.
Yeah, but in her hometown. That's the big difference. So O'Rourke was smart. He went up to Iowa. He was able to, the buzz around his campaign, I think, is what you just cannot get around. The Vanity Fair piece, all the coverage that we see yesterday, the fact that we're sitting here this morning talking about it, and Harris kind of dripped it down. The other thing is she's a Clinton Democrat. But because of the media buzz, I think who's able to make it out longer? O'Rourke does. He stays in.
Just like that. And then, ultimately, in this cycle, it seems like everybody's trying to out-Bernie. So where do those two?
They are. Well, if O'Rourke has an advantage there, it's on the youthful side. You know, most Democrats don't want an old white male, but the fact is Sanders is able to get as far to O'Rourke's left. O'Rourke was very pro-energy. He was oil and gas congressman when he was in Texas. Sanders is going to beat him up on that. And so you just can't get past who Bernie Sanders is, and he's a socialist, and that's what Democrats are looking for in this cycle.
Okay. One of the things, because Beto is from Texas, I can't tell you how many times I heard yesterday, you know, Texas could be in play. In fact, if you look at the New York Times headline, it says why Texas is nearing battleground status. It's not just about Beto. The Week wrote Texas is now a 2020 swing state, and The Hill says O'Rourke renews Democratic hopes about turning Texas blue. Do you put much stock in that?
I really don't. I think 2018 was a unique election in Texas. It was the highest midterm turnout ever. Right. And in fact, if you look at Governor Abbott, in his race, he was able to get 44% of the Hispanic vote. Senator Cruz still did well despite being outspent 3-1 by O'Rourke. O'Rourke put together a phenomenal campaign organization.
But he
I give him credit for that. But he lost, and that's kind of the key point to it. And you can't do that every year. And going into 2020, if O'Rourke was able to put 900 people on the ground in Texas, who knows? Maybe it becomes a little bit more in play. But I think the question is he able to raise the same sort of money running against Bernie Sanders or others that he did against Ted Cruz? And I don't see the New York and Hollywood liberals giving the money to O'Rourke versus Sanders as they did O'Rourke versus Cruz.
An exit question regarding the president getting a brushback by 12 Republicans yesterday in the Senate with the emergency declaration.
I think it helps him. Moves forward. He starts building the wall. It allows him to run in 2020. And I kept my campaign promises. I stood up to those people in my own party who didn't want me to build the wall. And yet, look there, the wall's going up. I think it may put him in a stronger position.
Chris, thank you very much. Good job. All right, 10 minutes before the top of the hour. The Covington Catholic High School student's family has already sued the Washington Post and CNN. We're talking about the Sandmans. Are more lawsuits coming? We're going to talk to his attorney next hour. Plus, new fallout for Lori Loughlin from that college admission scandal. Carly Shimkus with that coming up straight ahead.
We talked about getting involved with real crimes, about how that's a bad idea.
No, I know. It's not my fault. It's not like I go looking for this stuff. It just happens.
Wow, the fallout from the college admissions bribe scandal continues for Lori Loughlin. The Hallmark Channel confirming they have cut ties with the actress.
This as Sephora dropped their collaboration with her daughter.
Here with reaction lighting up social media, Fox News Headlines 24/7 reporter Carly Shimkus. And Carly, people are across the board. Some people feel sorry for her. Some people say good.
Yeah, there's some divided reaction. So the Hallmark Channel, it was a pretty swift decision, right, to drop her from the channel, especially because she was the face,
and
really,
the two kids
of the channel.
Out of school, out of USC.
Yeah, so sad. So the Hallmark Channel released a statement about this decision, saying, "We are saddened by the recent news surrounding the college admissions allegation. We are no longer working with Lori Loughlin and have stopped development of all productions that air on the Crown Media Family Network channels." So her daughter not only dropped by Sephora, also hair care company Tresemme. Like you said, reaction is divided. There are people that are saying that Hallmark should have kept her on the channel. One from Kelly says, "She made a mistake. She's a mom who wanted the best for her girls and used poor judgment. Haven't we all at one time or another? Hallmark Channel is about love, understanding, forgiveness, and second chances. It's a mistake on your part to let her go. Benny says this is the right decision. Kids all over our country work incredibly hard, and parents sometimes work 2, 3 jobs to help their kids get into college. These people come with all that money and walk right in. Reprehensible and disgusting. I see both sides of that argument, right?
Put it this way, a year ago, she's doing an interview, and she says, I don't push my kids to get A's. That's not what me and my husband do. So you can't, if you're not going to push your kids to get A's and high marks, then they can't get into elite colleges. You can't have it both ways.
That's right. Well, they are, like you said, reportedly leaving USC because they're afraid of getting bullied and harassed. So it's just so sad. I mean, this family had everything going for them, and they threw it all away by this stupid decision.
And there are stories out this morning that the parents could actually go to jail because they're cracking down.
It's wrong to teach your kids to lie. It's wrong to lie for your kids.
Admissions are tightening up on all these colleges across the country now. They're all changing.
Yeah.
All right.
As
Thank
they
you very
should.
much, Carly.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Coming up.
All right. Congressman Adam Kinzinger and Geraldo Rivera and Nigel Farage, they're all here live.